Chapter 21 of Banking Under Difficulties by George Ogilvy Preshaw. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Beeswax Candle. In Chapter 21. 12th February 1865. At Waimea purchased 500 ounces of gold. Flour very scarce. As soon as the packers arrived at the stores, the diggers took possession of the flour made up in 50-pound bags for the convenience of packing. Indeed, many of the diggers, in their anxiety to get a bag, went down the road to meet the packers, took the flour off the horses' backs, and carried it to the store on their own. A lot of drunken fellows about in the evening. Had hard work to get rid of them. The treasure, as usual, under my head. 18th February. Brougham, Walmsley, and self started with the gold to the mouth of the creek. The gold on pack horses, we following on foot. Had to tramp it to the Arahura, no horses having been sent to meet us. Drove from Arahura to Okatika in a bullock dray. Great excitement in town on the arrival of the escort. At the Waimea there was a warden's court, and of course a warden's clerk. The gentleman holding that position had an excellent opinion of himself, so much so that he got up a petition from the miners of that locality in favour of his being made a live warden in the place of Mr. Warden Shaw. This little arrangement didn't come off, and the warden's clerk remained warden's clerk still. But he had been in the habit of sitting on the bench, that is to say, in a place alongside the magisterial seat. And on the appearance of that most excellent magistrate, Mr. Warden Price, the following colloquy is said to have occurred. Warden, observing the clerk sitting by his side, "Dear me! Have you been made a J.P.?" Clerk, "No, sir." Warden, "Then please take your seat below there," pointing to the body of the court below the bench. Clerk, "But there is no table." Warden, "Then get a carpenter to make one immediately, or get a box. Get a box, sir." And the ambitious clerk, of course, subsided. The sequel, however, is better than the story. The following day, a brother of the offended clerk, who appears to have been in the Indian Army in the capacity of a surgeon, called upon Mr. Warden Price, and the scene that occurred is related to be as follows. Brother, presenting card, "Sir, I am Mr. So-and-so, an officer in the Indian Army. You have insulted my brother, sir." Warden, "Dear me, I have also been an officer in the army. Bailiff, turn this man out." Mr. Price's motto is Nemo me impune lacessit. At this time the roads were so bad that packers found great difficulty in getting from the beach to the Waimea, a distance of 5 miles, but reckoned 12. Several diggers, whom I presume to have been unfortunate, took to packing, and amongst others Charles L. Money, known as Charlie the Packer, and from whose book, Knocking About in New Zealand, I have extracted the following. At this time the road from the beach up to the township, a distance of 12 miles, passing as it did, the whole way through heavy bush and thick undergrowth, and crossing and recrossing the creek bed every 100 yards, was in a condition perfectly inconceivable to those who have not been to a great rush on the west coast diggings in New Zealand. Roots of all sizes, torn and mangled when small into a sort of macaroni squash, and when large remaining a dead hindrance to both horses and man, caused the mud ploughed by cattle and pack horses to assume the appearance of a torrent. So bad was it that the whole distance was marked by the bones of dead animals. The price given for the package of stores was £3 per 100 for the 12 miles, and I suddenly bethought me of the possibility of making myself into a very profitable pack horse. Turning into the nearest store accordingly, I called for a nobbler, and asked the storeman, while he bittered the decoction, what he would give a man for bringing the various articles he required. He stared on hearing my question and said, "Why, you're never going to make a beast of burden of yourself, mate, are you?" I replied that I would make any sort of beast of myself if the remuneration were only sufficient. He said, "Well, old man, you bring me the goods and I'll pay you the same as the 'osses." "Done," said I. "What are you wanting up most at this time?" "Well," said the storekeeper, "I've had a run on my picks, so you can bring as many of them as you like. though they're not a lively lot to carry about, and I should fancy would give a man a crick in the back. There's a little keg of rum waiting for me down at the beach, so you can make up a load the best way you can." I found the keg awkward enough, but the picks were altogether too lively to carry far. After working the skin off the small of my back, I left them halfway and completed my journey with the rum cask. Next day, in place of wood and iron, I shouldered a 50-pound bag of flour and did the distance comfortably, earning thereby 30 shillings. I continued to carry from 50 to 70 pounds for some days, always increasing little by little the weight of my load. As this was the first time such a thing had been attempted on those diggings, I had to undergo a tremendous fire of "Jaws!" from every chum I passed. The word "jaw" expresses the derision usually bestowed on new chums on the diggings, or any man acting or dressing or speaking in any way considered as outre by the diggers themselves. "He laughs who wins," and as I knew many who thus jeered were glad to get £1 a day by even harder work than I was doing for double the money, I could afford to laugh with them. After 3 weeks' practice, having become known Charlie the Packer, I had plenty of orders to carry up every description of store, from tea and gin cases to soap and saltfish, and seldom after that did I shoulder less than £100. Times getting dull about the 6 mile, I was joined one by many others, several of whom had been among the first to "jaw" me at the beginning. Never having strained myself beyond my powers, I did not feel any ill effects from the heavy labour I underwent, though £100 was a weight which very few cared to carry on such a track. 2 men who had taken to this means of gaining their livelihood fell victims to their ambition, for instead of commencing with the calf and ending with the bull, as I had done, they staggered under the full weight of £100 bags of flour, sugar, etc., until their strength gave way and their coffins had to be prepared for them. A day or 2 after the demise of one of these poor fellows, I took a bag of flour to Charlie MacLeod, the storekeeper, who, being a carpenter by trade, did duty when required as an undertaker. As I dropped my load inside the door, Charlie looked up from his hammering, and eyeing it where it lay, said, pointing to his work, "Thought 1 was enough, but I guess you'll want your measure, old hoss, before long." And he believed it too. 23rd February 1865. Purchased an allotment for the bank and put up a small building thereon, size 12 by 12. 5th March. Western Goldfields proclaimed first week in March. W.C. Revel appointed resident magistrate and warden, sworn in at Wellington by Judge Johnston, also appointed Deputy Commissioner of Customs. Messrs. Seed and Limming came down to arrange matters. 6th March. Purchased the largest parcel of gold that has yet been sold on the coast, 600 ounces, from a party of miners, 4 in number, the result of 2 months' work. 2 steamers off the bar, Nelson and Stormbird. The Nelson tried the bar stern first. Finding she could not manage it, steamed on to the Grey, followed by the Stormbird. The rush may now be said to be fairly set in. Finding the place going ahead so rapidly, Mr. Brougham marked off a street at the back of and parallel to Revel Street, which he named Wharf Street, the steamers lying just at the foot of it by the river bank and where they discharged cargo. 12 or more allotments were pegged off. Brougham put as many numbers in his hat as there were allotments, which were drawn by the few persons about at the time. The allotments were valued at £20 each, and in less than 2 months were selling from £200 to £300. 7th March. I started for Nelson per SS Wallaby. 8th March. Met a small steamer, Waipara, bound for Hokitika, her first trip. Arrived at Nelson at 5 p.m. When we reached the wharf, had quite a rush of business people on board, all eager to hear the latest news, and in a frantic state of excitement when they heard we had brought up 1,900 ounces of gold, the escort up to this time not exceeding 700 ounces. 26th March. Started again for the west coast per SS Nelson. Arrived off Hokitika on the morning of the 28th and found quite a fleet of vessels in the roadstead. Took passengers from 2 or 3 of them at £1 per head. Crossed the bar soon after 10. Found the SS Stormbird ashore at the North Spit. Scarcely knew the place again, it had so changed. Found Revel Street nearly a mile long. Some very good buildings erected. No end of shanties, and the street crowded with diggers. So crowded that it was with difficulty that I elbowed my way through, went over to see my friend Brougham, with whom I had lunch, found quite a crowd of government officials at the camp, Messrs. Seed, Revel, Rolleston, Kenrick, Mallet and Liming, having arrived from Christchurch per Nelson on the 19th March. On the 21st, Mr. Revel opened an office in a tent, and issued the first miner's right to a brother of his, Mr. H. Revel. At the time of which I am writing, money was so plentiful that all seemed to have more than sufficient for their needs. Of course, it was the gold digger who made the capital for all, but that capital was distributed in many curious ways. I remember one young fellow, of a type that would seem impossible to any but a colonist. He was the son of a professional man, and had been educated with a view to succeeding his father. But after trying that and various other occupations, banking included, he determined to come to the West Coast and try his luck. Here he did almost anything and everything. He was by turns clerk, customs house officer, auctioneer, digger, and at last paper seller and general postman. It is in connection with the last that his experiences may prove interesting. They are as nearly as possible in his own words, as related by him to me many years after. You want to know about my paper running experiences? Ah, those were queer days, and money was plentiful as dirt. I've told you that I went into the custom house, of which I soon got tired. After leaving that, I hardly knew what to do. I had but little money. One day I was in the shop of a bookseller with whom I was acquainted. I asked him if he knew of anything that would suit me. Yes, he replied. There's a fortune to be made paper running at the diggings. After a little talk, I thought I could but try it. At that time, once one left Greytown, there was no postal communication to any one of the numerous diggings situated on or about the Grey River, although they must have contained a population of some 5,000. Accordingly, the next day I started with a stock of papers on my back to travel around the various diggings. The first halting place was No Town, a small village about 12 miles from Greymouth. Up to here I went in a whaleboat, which was partly pulled, partly poled, and the rest of the distance dragged up by the crew, they up to their waists in water with the rope over their shoulders. This was termed tracking. Such a trip it was. The boatmen, the roughest and strongest men that could be got, were half the time wet through with water, to eliminate which, from their system, they consistently soaked themselves with rum. Every few trips some one of them would lose his life, as the smallest slip in a rapid river like the Grey meant almost certain death. Once safely arrived at No Town, I used to start for German Gully, about 8 miles away. Road there simply was none. It was a mere track cut through the dense bush, and available for pack horses only. These used to go sliding and slipping along, and every now and then one would get hopelessly bogged. Then, should there not be sufficient help to get it out, the poor brute would be unloaded and simply left to sink deeper and deeper, till at last he sank out of sight, engulfed in the horrible morass. Once at the diggings, however, all previous discomfort was forgotten. Paper! A regular rush. Here you are, lad. Give me an Australasian. How much? 5 bob, old man. Give it here, then. Have you a nation there? Only one left. I want £1 for it. Too much. I'll give you 15 bob. All right, collar. And the paper and money would change hands. It was simply coining money. The regular price was 5 shillings for any of the Australian weeklies, and as much as you could get, but never less than 10 shillings for any of the home papers. The life, though, was simply awful. At that time, to many of the diggings, food had to be carried on men's backs. Flour ranged from 9p to 1 shilling 6p, the pannikin full, and other things in proportion. Thus it will be seen that although one got 2 shillings 6p for posting a letter, and as much more for bringing one from the Greymouth post office, it was money hardly earned. A fortnight's trip I usually used to make from £40 to £50. With this I used, when I got to Greymouth, to make myself comfortable and live as a gentleman for about a fortnight or 3 weeks. Of course, I was a young fool in those days. It made the money fly. And even when there was a certain percentage of well-bred loafers who were only too happy to be shouted for, without having to shout in return. On one occasion, whilst at Red Jack's I heard of a way to No Town that would materially shorten the distance. I had nearly sold out. I was on my way down to Greymouth. I had with me nearly £100, beside a few watches given to me to get repaired, as well as several letters. By this time my constant appearance at or near the stated time had invested me with all the privileges of a postman. Mails to the outlying districts there were none. To me came a digger. "You want to find the short track to No Town?" "I do." "Then we'll travel in company, for I'm going there too and knows the way." "Thanks," I replied. "You'd better start at once." It was then about 3 p.m, and the short track was reckoned 8 miles. Before going, we had, of course, the usual liquor up, in fact 2 or 3, and my guide also took some with him. After some steep climbing, we found ourselves at the top of a range, having walked 4 miles. There were several tracks about, leading to various old prospecting claims, most of which had been long since deserted. "Are you quite sure of the way?" I asked. "Yes, I think so," was my companion's reply. "At any rate, this is our direction." I thought this pleasant, especially as a dense, mizzling rain was falling, rendering it impossible to distinguish the points of the compass. We walked on for about a mile, when my mate exclaimed, "I believe we're wrong after all. Anyhow, No Town must lie this way." I remonstrated and endeavoured to induce him to camp where we were, and return on the same track in the morning, wishing heartily I had not taken the short track. It was of no avail, and not wishing to be left behind, I started into the bush with him. Soon night closed in. Nothing was to be heard to disturb the death-like silence but the drip, drip of the rain, or the melancholy cry of the weka or Maori hen. Cold, weary, footsore, blanketless and supperless, we had nothing to do but watch for the first dawn of day. Certainly we had my mate's bottle of rum. I had, I think, 2 small drinks of it. Next morning I awoke. Yes, found that I had slept, that the grog must have been drugged, and that my guide had decamped, having robbed me of all my cash and 2 of the most valuable of the watches entrusted to my charge. Here was a predicament. I had had nothing to eat since the previous night. I was utterly bushed and half stupefied with the drug that had been used. It was no use, however, crying over spilt milk. I started in what I thought was the direction of No Town, and after 2 days of utter misery, found myself utterly worn out on the summit of what appeared to be a dividing range. Which side should I descend? If I made a mistake, I knew I was too exhausted to retrace my steps. My late friend had left me a solitary shilling. I tossed up. Heads to the right hand, tails to the left. Fortunately, it was tails to the left. I descended the range to the left, and after about half a day, such as I hope never again to experience, I found myself on the banks of the Grey River. At about an hour more, a boat came close to where I was lying. I hailed it, and on relating my story was kindly taken to Greymouth, where, by the aid of some good Samaritans, I was enabled to lie up for about a fortnight. Having recovered, I got a stock of papers on credit, but it was my last run. During my absence, others had taken my place, and soon after I again returned to the digging. I may add that the diggers whose watches had been stolen refused to accept any compensation. I, of course, informed the police, but the thief was never taken. Verily, poverty makes one acquainted with strange bedfellows. End of chapter 21.